death row inmates who survived their execution. These prisoners experienced the excruciating pain of execution but lived to see another day. Some were electrocuted. Some faced the needle while others dangled from the ceiling. But they all had one thing in common: they survived. Here are true stories of prisoners who cheated death during their execution and what happened to them after. This is Creepy True Cases. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss an episode. Let's start the case with one of the biggest anomalies in the history of executions, the case of Willie Francis. In 1944, Willie Francis, a young African American, was arrested for the murder of Andrew Thomas, a pharmacist from St. Martinville, Louisiana. Andrew was found with multiple gunshot wounds. But there was more to the story. Andrew was known to abuse kids, so the authorities assumed that Willie Francis was a victim who came back for revenge. 16-year-old Willie Francis was arrested because the police claimed they found a wallet belonging to Andrew in his possession. This was never proved. It was also discovered that the gun used for the murder belonged to the personal assistant of the county sheriff. There was also no viable explanation for this. What happened next was unexpected. Willie was coerced into writing a confession and was tried without witnesses. He was immediately found guilty and sentenced to death by electric chair. On the 3rd of May 1946, Willie was strapped to the chair and executed. Unfortunately, the chair malfunctioned due to poor installation and therefore did not produce enough current to unalive Francis. Willie Francis survived and his execution was rescheduled. While he was in prison, another lawyer named Bertrand du Blanche took an interest in the case and decided to represent Francis. She appealed to the Supreme Court about the flaws in the trial, ranging from the missing body of the pharmacist to the origin of the murder weapon. However, the Supreme Court rejected the appeal, and on the 9th of May 1947, Willie Francis was escorted again to the execution chamber. This time the execution was successful. His name still lingers in the court of justice as a reminder that flaws exist everywhere, even at the place where you'd expect justice. Next is John Lee. Born on August 15, 1864 in England, John Lee was involved in crime from an early age. At the age of 21, he was accused of unaliving his employer, Anne McKees, in her home. There was no concrete evidence against him, except that he was found on the premises during the time of the murder, and he happened to be the only male figure around at that time. Coincidentally, he also had some cuts on his arm, so he was unable to convince the jury of his innocence. He was immediately sentenced to death by hanging. On the 23rd of February 1885, he was taken to the gallows, and the rope was placed around his neck. A sack covered his face. When the executioner pulled on the lever, the trap door was stuck and refused to open. They tried several times to no avail. When Lee stepped off the door, the lever began to work again. They made some adjustments to the mechanism, but still, anytime Lee stood on the trap door, it would refuse to open. The execution was rescheduled and Lee was returned to his cell. Later on, his sentence was commuted to a life sentence by a judge. John Lee continued to appeal, as his legal representatives brought forth new evidence. It was later discovered that John wasn't the only male around the premises at the time of the murder. Without further evidence, John Lee was released from prison in 1907. Next is Kenneth Smith. In the 1980s, a preacher named Charles Sennett hired a hitman by the name of Kenneth Smith to assassinate his wife, Elizabeth Sennett. Charles owed huge sums of money to various organizations and decided to unalive his wife so that he could collect life insurance money. He had commissioned 2 assassins, Kenneth Smith and John Forrest Parker, to do the job. However, the plan was unsuccessful and led to the arrest of Kenneth Smith. He was given a death sentence and spent over 30 years on death row. Finally, the date for his execution came, and he was to die by lethal injection. On the 17th of November 2022, Kenneth Smith was escorted to the execution chamber. The administrators were unable to find a vein, and this led to hours of poking with the needle. The process was agonizing and difficult to watch. The administrators who were desperate to find a vein caused more suffering without any success. According to reports, muscles were punctured, and at some point, the guards were instructed to turn the gurney backwards so that Smith's feet were turned upwards while his head hung downwards in an inverted position. Smith recounted his experience, saying that the administrators were covered in his blood and were still unable to find a vein. In his words, "They punctured my clavicle while attempting to insert a central intravenous line into the subclavian artery. It took at least 4 hours of trial and error before the court ordered the cessation of the execution." Smith's legal representatives described the incident as traumatic and hoped for a smoother process next time. But things got even weirder. On the 26th of August 2023, another means of execution was decided upon. It was death by nitrogen hypoxia. The method was permitted by the state of Alabama, even though it had never been used before. The procedure was simple. Smith only had to inhale the gas until he lost consciousness. On the 25th of January 2024, Kenneth Smith was once again escorted to the chambers. He made a final statement and was strapped in. As the process began, it was anything but short and peaceful. The next 25 minutes were even more traumatic to watch. Smith shook violently as the gas penetrated his lungs. He didn't survive this time. But the disturbing images were forever engraved in the minds of those present. Next is Romell Broom. Romell Broom has had a long record of criminal activities in Ohio. He started with car robberies on the highway, and soon engaged in other activities such as kidnapping, SA, and murder. The final straw was the kidnapping, SA, and unaliving of a young girl named Trina Middleton. Trina and her friends had attended a football game that day in East Cleveland, Ohio, and were on their way home when Broom ambushed and took her. His DNA was identified from the body, leading to his arrest and conviction. He was sentenced to death. On the 15th of September 2009, Broom was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection. However, the world bore witness to another failed execution. The executioners tried to find a suitable vein but failed. The process went on for more than 2 hours, inflicting pain. Broom sustained several injuries and damages to his arm before the state intervened, rescheduling the execution. It was supposed to be moved to a week later, but Broom's lawyers succeeded in buying him more time, and the execution was delayed for years. While Broom was in prison, he wrote a book about his harrowing encounter during execution. The court finally decided on a date in 2022 as the new execution date, but that day never came. Romell Broom died on December 20, 2020, from COVID-19. He lived longer than the state had wanted and never experienced another execution. Next is William Duell. Hanging has always been a questionable method of execution, not just because of its archaic nature but also its inefficiency. A young man named William Duell was convicted as one of the attackers of a young maiden named Sarah Griffin. He was sentenced to hang on the 24th of November 1740. That fateful day he hung for about 20 minutes, which was enough time for the process. He was declared dead and taken to the medics for dissection. But when his body arrived at the coroner's, they noticed something was wrong. William was still alive. His pulse was slow, but with time, it became stronger until he fully regained consciousness. William's miraculous recovery was reported to the authorities, and he was sent back to prison that same day. After surviving an execution, William was not the same. He had developed a critical case of delirium and did not remember he had undergone an execution. As his mental state deteriorated further, he was pardoned by the state, and his sentence was reduced to exile to North America. He lived out the rest of his years in Boston until he died in 1805. He was the first of many to survive an execution. No survival story would be complete without the case of Wenceslao Moguel. Wenceslao was born on the 1st of November 1896. He served in the Mexican army, and at the beginning of the Mexican Revolution he was captured and sentenced to death. At that time, the most popular method of execution was the firing squad. It was brutal, and surviving such an event was impossible. Wenceslao was shot at least 9 times in the body, and to ensure that he was actually gone, he was shot once in the head. But he didn't die. His body was taken down from the pole, and he was disposed of at a dumping site. All the while, Wenceslao played dead to avoid being shot again. He waited until all the soldiers had left, and then he crawled to the Church of Santiago Apostle, a few blocks away. He was found by one of the members, who took him in and treated his wounds. He was then taken back to his hometown to recover. His case was one of the most miraculous execution cases in history, and shows how resilient the human body can be when it wants to live. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications. For more true crime episodes, click on the next video.